Vampire Hunter D, Volume 27, Nightmare Village. Written by Hideyuki Kikuchi. Illustrations by Yoshitaka Amano. Those Called by the Rain. Chapter 1, First Part. From off somewhere in the urgent pattering of the rain, there came a far deeper echo like a rumbling in the earth. The room began to quake a bit. Oh, damn. Grabbing the traveling bag resting by his side, Bly used it to hit the girl and the procurer lying to his right. What do you think you're doing? Looking them in their irate but still sleepy eyes, the man told them, The ground's rumbling. There's a massive landslide on its way. And with that he jumped down to the dirt floor ahead of them. As if from the force of his landing, the building then shook quite clearly. Exiting the hotel, Bly ran off toward a hill to the west he'd noticed before checking in, and behind him was the sound of voices and footfalls. On the very least, the other two from his room, plus another girl, who'd been staying in the big room, had been saved. No matter what fate the future might hold for them, at the moment his heart was clearly carved with the words, Where there's life, there's hope. Bly didn't invite them to join him, and the rest would depend on the luck of each individual. Rain lashed him from head to toe. The wind was blowing in exactly from the west. And that figures, he thought to himself. First a landslide, then a downpour right in his face. And that was still kid stuff. All he needed now was to be surrounded by an angry mob and some cannibals, and then he'd finally be ready to throw in the towel. After he'd run for about 3 minutes, 2 shadowy horses and their riders passed him on the ride. Apparently there had been customers willing to take a private room at that old spook house or hotel. On passing the man in the hall, Bly had gotten the impression he was a traveling warrior, and the other one with him was probably his wife. And Bly finally turned and looked back. Lightning flashed. He would have killed for an umbrella. All 5 of the other figures were using their arms to shield their faces and heads. Fortunately, most seemed to subscribe to the frontier traveler tradition of not changing into pajamas, and all either had their baggage on their back or in hand. What about the hotel staff? Bly wondered. He squinted his eyes in that direction just as the lightning flashed once more, and by its light he saw the rickety form of the 2-story building fold like a house of cards. They've had it, I guess. At the same time, the ground beneath him rumbled and shook, and behind the figures who fell, one after another, something big and black that could have been either a wall or a wave was rolling right that way. And just a bit ahead of it, there towered a steep cliff. Since the sides and top of it were devoid of plant life, if it collapsed, the heavy downpour would swiftly turn it into a ravenous mud monster, bearing down on them and devouring everything in its path. This way, hurry up! And Bly shouted, pointing with one hand and running like a man possessed. He could hear the rumbling of the earth much closer. It was 5 minutes later that he reached the bottom of the hill. He climbed it without thought of anything else. Fortunately, the slope wasn't very steep, and that also meant it would take some time to reach the summit. Now that he was on the hill, he could finally let up a little bit. Trees were growing all over it, so it didn't seem likely to give way easily. After about a minute's wait, the rest arrived one after another. And there was a plump, oldish man in a jacket with a girl dressed in the inimitable fashion of a traveling country bumpkin. A strangely sexy, middle-aged woman whose profession was evident at a glance, and a young couple who each appeared to be about 20 years old, give or take a year. He immediately knew the story behind the oldish man and the country girl, but he wasn't sure about the young couple. From the way they were dressed, they were probably a pair of sweethearts headed back home from a big town, perhaps even engaged to be married. Lightning flashed. Everyone was soaked to the skin. Still, the rain kept on pounding them mercilessly and beating down on the hill. What the? Bly exclaimed, straining his eyes. The people had been transformed into inhabitants of a stark white world, and behind them something came into view that seemed out of a dream. She wore a dress as white as snow, Her arms and neck were adorned with bracelets and necklaces of gold and jewels, yet all that could be taken away, and still her youthful beauty and lithe form would have burned themselves into the retinas of any who saw her, even in a blinding world of brilliant colors. Bly stared at her in amazement, forgetting the rain, the rumbling of the ground, even his own fate. Stared at her? No, the world had already been enveloped once again by darkness. Had it just been a fleeting illusion? The trembling that reached him through the soles of his shoes shook Bly back to his senses. "Climb the hill, the landslide's nearly on top of us," he shouted, taking the middle-aged woman by the hand and digging the toes of his shoes into the slope. By the time they climbed to the top, all of them had reached the limits of their strength. 3 of them were women. It was incredible they'd all made it that far. The rain didn't let up in the least. As the shadowy figures huffed for breath like beasts in their death throes, Bly said to them, "Okay, we should be fine now. I don't see any landslide coming up this far." Bly looked down at the base of the hill. He couldn't see very well. Lightning flashed. The man's blood froze. His field of view was filled with a sea of churning mud. "All the way up here?" he stammered. Mud surged up to his ankles, when it then quickly receded again. Bly nearly grew catatonic. From off to his left, someone asked, "What's wrong?" Well, the speaker was still wheezing for breath, and the voice was full of vitality. "Didn't you just see that?" "See what?" A fresh flash of lightning picked out the round-faced old man neatly dressed in a suit and tie, but Bly's interest focused on the bottom of the hill. The snarling sea of mud was retreating, and quite clearly back the way it had come. "What are the chances of that happening?" He groaned in spite of himself, but he actually got a reply. "None at all." Framed by the rain bouncing off him, the plump man quivered. "The Lord of the Mountain must have ordered it back or something, eh?" Actually, it looked more like it was avoiding the hill. This hill here. Bly looked all around, but he couldn't see anything. He had to wait for the lightning. "What's that?" The plump man grunted, cupping a hand behind his ear. Bly, too, listened intently. From up ahead there was the sound of hoofbeats. 2 horses were approaching, and by the time the pair halted beside them, Bly had guessed the riders' identities. It could only be the couple who'd left the rest of them in their dust. "I'm surprised you got away," the man said to them from the back of his steed. To Bly he sounded high-handed. He wasn't at all concerned about their safety. Their continued survival surprised him only to the extent he questioned why they'd been spared. In other words, in his heart he believed they'd have been better off dead. "Yeah, well, your horses were so fast, we had to speed up chasing you." The man on the horse grinned. "Oh, don't take it personally. We barely made it out alive ourselves. Allow me to introduce myself. I'm Lyle Brennan, warrior." "Sorry we ran off and left you to fend for yourselves," someone said in a sensuous voice, making Bly recall there was a woman there, too. "I'm Josette, his wife." "Both of you are warriors. Isn't that cozy?" "Not my wife. She's just an ordinary woman." "Beg pardon?" My confusion came from her being just as quick to run away. At the tail end of his sarcastic remark, Bly felt something cold run down his spine, a powerful thirst for blood. The warrior moved forward on his horse. "Now, dear," Josette's voice halted his advance. "Watch that mouth of yours." The warrior said in an intimidating tone, crushed free of emotion, but the rain needled his words. Come now," the plump man said, stepping between them. "I'm Bambi Arbuckle." Physician and procurer of women, a pleasure to meet you. Ignoring Bly, whose eyes had gone wide, he continued, "Since we've all been fortunate enough to be saved, it would be a shame for us to go killing each other now. As for the 2 of you, have you found nowhere on this hill where we might take shelter from the rain?" "Over that way," There was one big old tree, lots of branches to it, so it should be enough to keep the rain off us. It'll probably be lit up by morning anyway. The warrior's voice said in a tone that made it seem that she at least was sincere. Hear that, everybody. Bly echoed in a tone that ceded nothing to the rain. He knew that the rest of them had gathered around him. All we've got to do is wait for sunup. Okay, just have to tough it out a little more. So how far is it to this tree of yours? Roughly 500 yards. Is this hill as big as all that? Probably bigger. Even by the flashes of lightning, I couldn't see all the way to the ends of it. Wow. At any rate, let's get going. That girl and the lady I'll take on my horse. The other one can ride with my husband. The girl Chaussette referred to was the one traveling with the plump man, and the lady was the fairer half of the couple. Who the other one was went without saying. Oh, that'll be a great help, the alluring woman said, gathering the hem of her nightgown and making a beeline for Brennan's horse. Extending her hand, she said, I'm Charlotte. Charmed to make your acquaintance. Lyle Brennan. You're a warrior, didn't you say? That's marvelous. In the meantime, the girl and the young woman, went over Chausette's horse and introduced themselves. My name's Bev. I'm Emily. Welcome. The trip's only 500 yards, but it'll be a pleasure having you aboard. Just as the rider extended her hand and was about to take hold of the girl, the plump man grabbed his young charge by the collar and jerked her back. Just a minute. What do you think you're doing? Chausette asked angrily. I believe I told you I'm procurer of women. The girl's merchandise I'm in the midst of delivering to the town Jillian. Bly and the others could only stare at him in amazement. He had indeed said he was a procurer. However, the plump man had looked so much like a courteous physician, it made them forget that fact completely. As such, he continued, I can't have the girl leaving my side. Take that young lady, Beau, with you instead. No, I'm fine, the young man protested. To which Arbuckle replied, Go on and climb aboard. You should conserve your strength, since there's no telling what could come next. As I recall, get on. Bly also advised him, and the young man did so without further reluctance. I'm sorry I didn't introduce myself sooner. Jan Roland is the name, he then said. The rest of you wait here. Once we've unloaded everybody, we'll be right back. With Chausette's words as a parting gift, the two horses dashed off. Using both hands to shield his head, Bly said, We'll catch a cold in this for sure, huh? Uh-huh, the plump man said with a nod, while the girl just lowered her head. Miss, just hang in there a little longer, Bly told the girl. He then inquired in a calculatedly rude tone, So, old-timer, what was it you were about to recall anyway? As a doctor, he was accustomed to more deference. Glaring at him, Arbuckle said, A long time ago, this area had one of the noble's facilities. According to the stories, it was a top-secret laboratory built on direct orders from their sacred ancestor, no less. First part end. Second part. Though the eastern sky lightened, the rain didn't abate. The tree was so massive it would have taken 10 grown men just to link arms around its trunk, and its great leafy branches reached out in all directions like helping hands, granting sufficient shelter from the rain, though it could offer no aid in deciding what they should do next. I know it was a hard climb up the hill and all, but there's really nothing to do but go back down again, head to the highway, and wait for a patrol wagon to come by. Brennan voiced his opposition to Bly's proposal, saying, Look at this rain. First of all, wagons from the capital won't be running on time in this. Plus, I don't quite think the landslide's over completely. As a result, there's a very good chance not just the road out to the highway, but even the highway itself is buried in mud. Yeah, but staying here is not going to solve anything, is it? If it's like you say, rescue parties won't be here for a week and a half or more, so we've got no choice but to go to them. As Bly was refuting Brennan, he heard someone say, Does it hurt? Arbuckle had noticed the girl was lying back against the tree trunk. She had a red handkerchief pressed to her right ankle, though the red dripping from it suggested that wasn't the handkerchief's true color. I cut it on a fallen branch, and the girl said, her lips twisting in pain. Apparently the sandal she wore offered nothing but much in protection. Let me have a look, Arbuckle said, pushing the handkerchief aside and immediately smiling broadly. It's nothing serious. However, it wouldn't do to have any strange germs get into the wound either. I'll patch you right up. And with that, he opened a leather-bound suitcase and began rummaging through its contents. Look at that. And the girl won't be able to move, which means he won't be able to leave here either. I guess we'll just have to wait after all, Brennan said triumphantly. I agree. I've had it with running here, there, and everywhere, said Charlotte, her tone one of fatigue. Each and every one of them was soaked from the rain and utterly exhausted. If rescue wasn't soon in coming, they'd be sapped mentally even more quickly than physically. Well, then I guess this is it for me, Bly said, standing up. I'll leave the rest of you to you. Hang in there, everybody. Taking his saddlebags off the horse's back and slinging them over his shoulder, he let out a single sigh before he began to walk away. No one tried to stop him, and Bly had no qualms about leaving them. Men I sure am beat. That was his only thought. It was at that moment the hill shook, a scream rang out, and the quaking didn't subside. The earth spun, the rain eddied, the dark clouds danced, and the sky went around and around. Bly remembered letting out a cry of, "Whoa!" His footing was gone without warning, and after feeling like he'd fallen forever, Bly finally passed out. The man realized he'd just been slapped on the cheek. Charlotte had her hand back to deliver another, but relented, saying, "Well, good morning to you. What do you think you're doing?" Bly was cautious, but he quickly sat up and surveyed his surroundings. He was still at the base of that tree. It continued to rain. What about the others? They were there, every last one of them. Lucky bastards. The fortunate individuals in question were all gazing straight ahead. Bly followed their lead, or rather that had been the first thing to catch his eye when he woke up. You might say he was confirming it now. Little by little, something astonishing had begun to take shape. The ambiguous mist became a solid fog, forming up like clouds, solidifying. Hey, what the hell is that? The others must have heard him. However, no one responded. It wasn't a vast expanse of ground that spread before them. Filling their rain-hazed field of vision was a panoramic view of a soggy little village. Old-fashioned homes of sticks and mud, a type that could no longer be found even in the most far-flung corners of the frontier, surrounded a central square, while the eastern edge of that square was bordered by a broad river running from north to south. On the flat land on the other side of the water were about 20 farmhouses and some other buildings that were probably storehouses for grain. About 50 yards north of there stood a 60-foot-high tower that apparently served both as a lookout point and a sanctuary. Thick forests surrounded the village on all sides, and on its western edge was a rather high hill topped with solid-looking fortifications that challenged the heavens. At first, Bly thought it was an illusion. However, the damp walls of the houses glistening with the rain, the surface of the river pounded to a froth, and trees swaying from the rain's beating soon convinced him that he was mistaken. Where the hell are we? That got an answer. I don't know. Looks like a really old village, said Charlotte. How'd we all end up here? Bly asked. At his reasonable question, the alluring middle-aged woman shot a quick glance to the heavens and said, "As soon as you started to leave, the ground shook and spun around. While we were all knocked off our feet, we fell here. Given that, this would have to be somewhere underground, though it doesn't really look that way at all, does it?" Bly nodded. His eyes flying from one place in the village to another, he said, "There's no one around, is there?" "Yeah, now you mention it. Charlotte conceded with a nod. There wasn't a soul to be seen in the village square or on the streets. It was like a ghost town, yet it didn't seem the least bit dilapidated. Put some people in it, and the village would soon look like it was ready to begin its day. Emily, someone said in a clingy tone, causing the two of them to turn. About 10 feet away, the young man named Jan was shaking his slumping sweetheart, Emily, by the shoulders. Her labored breathing could be heard all the way over where they were. Arbuckle was nearby, and he inched closer on his knees and put his hand to Emily's forehead. "She's got an awful fever," the plump man said. "Must have caught a cold. Exhaustion might also have a hand in it. If it gets any worse, she'll come down with pneumonia in no time." "Let's go to the village," Jan said, looking around at the group. "I'm against it," Brennan asserted coldly. "An ancient village just pops up right in front of us all of a sudden. I don't think there's anything right about the place, and take a look at those fortifications. What are we supposed to do if there are nobles lurking up there?" "Do what you like. I'm going." Arbuckle's decision surprised the group, but they quickly understood it. In his former location, Beth was slumped back against the tree trunk. Her face was flushed and her breathing ragged. "She's already got pneumonia. I've got to get her warmed up post-haste. What are the rest of you going to do?" "I don't want any part of it either," Bly said, shaking his head. "No matter how you look at it, there's something wrong with the place, and I've got no interest in heading over there. Best of luck to you all, okay? As soon as I've had a little rest, I'm getting out of here." "We're leaving too," Brennan declared, looking at Bly, who turned away in a snit. It seemed like he didn't like people copying him. "Oh then, off with the lot of you. Off you go. Happy trails," Bly told them, waving one hand as he leaned back against the tree trunk. Suddenly he noticed that Charlotte was beside him, and he said to her, "What do you do?" "For starters, the same thing as you." "Huh. After I've had some rest, then I'll decide," she said, sitting right down by his side. And Bly sensed danger. "Is she plotting to make me her own personal bodyguard?" "Well, I guess we'll each go our own ways then," Brennan said, surveying the group once he was high in the saddle. And giving a nod to Josette beside him, he delivered a kick to his steed's flanks. And the two horses began to canter away. Rebounding spray from the rain outlined both riders and mounts in white. And the entrance to the village was to the east, and there was no palisade, probably on account of the nobles' castle. The creatures humans feared most, ironically, were the greatest safeguard against monsters and bandits. "I'm sorry. Goodbye," Josette said in parting. Seemingly ignoring that, Arbuckle went over to Bly and asked, "Are you sure you won't go to the village with us?" "Damn sure." "Don't be that way. Granted, there's something strange about the village, beyond a doubt. But knowing that, we're going there anyway, because otherwise, the lives of those two innocent girls are certain to be lost. We'd like you to act as our bodyguard." And that's rich talk from a flesh peddler. "What are you talking about, innocent? Aren't you the same son of a who's going to sell one of those innocent young girls to the underworld to line your stinking pockets?" "I'm speaking now as Arbuckle, the physician. Don't try to spin this, you two-faced bastard." Bly snapped back. "Are you reading me?" As soon as I finished setting up. Resting up. And the world was bleached white by lightning. But that wasn't the entire extent of it. With a roar to shake both heaven and earth, the colossal tree was split in two. "Holy shit," Bly exclaimed, jumping up. The others also got to their feet or else tried to crawl away from the tree. The 150-foot-tall tree being split lengthwise was a sight more than sufficient to leave them dumbstruck. And there was but the single sound of a tree falling. And both halves of the trunk had hit the ground at precisely the same time. Once the wind and quaking had subsided, Bly called out, "Everybody all right?" Fortunately, they were all okay. However, their guardian angel against the wind and rain was no more. "Let's go to the village," Arbuckle said, laying a hand on Bly's shoulder. The man shook it off, grabbing his things, and started to walk away. Since half of the tree trunk was blocking the road, he'd have to detour around it. Once he'd gone as far as the still smoking base of the tree, he turned and looked back. Everyone was looking in his direction. Charlotte was there too. "If you're waiting for an invitation, sorry to disappoint you." Bly turned around and started walking again. Something about this made him anxious. There was something important here that he was missing. The sudden appearance of a cyborg horse from behind the toppled tree proved it. It was Brennan. Josette was on behind him, her arms wrapped limply around his waist. Brennan also had the reins to Josette's cyborg horse in his grip. "We're going to the village," Brennan said with distaste. "My wife got hit by a falling branch, and you can see the shape she's in. You should turn back too. The village doesn't seem to want us to leave." "Now you're talking nonsense too," Bly said, giving the warrior a scornful look. "I'm leaving, and I don't think there'll be any more branches falling." He started walking around the horse. Suddenly his legs sank, or so it appeared. But then his body was neck-deep in the ground, which had been transformed into a morass. Though Bly clawed at it wildly with hands and feet, he only succeeded in stirring the mud, and he was rapidly sinking. Soon he couldn't breathe. "Is this the end?" Despair whispered to him. "No, I've still got things to do. I'll be damned if I die in a place like this." His consciousness drifted away. He sought oxygen, and mud rushed into his lungs. Second part end. "Is this the end?" Despair whispered to him. "No, I've still got things to do. I'll be damned if I'll die in a place like this." His consciousness drifted away. He sought oxygen, and mud rushed into his lungs. Second part end. A third part. Something heavy was expelled from his mouth and nose, and oxygen came in. As Bly coughed violently, flecks of mud flew from his stomach and chest. "Are you okay?" "You sure are a lucky one, mister." It was Charlotte again. Less than tactfully, Bly groaned. "You again." "Well, excuse me for living, but you should be happy, you know. It wasn't me that saved you." "Huh." Before his stunned eyes, Charlotte's expression shifted strangely, and she replied, "By the time I ran over, you'd already been hauled out, you see." "But who?" "The one who did it was still right there." It was... Charlotte squinted her eyes. Her body was trembling, as if she'd just downed the dregs of fear. And it wasn't just because she was soaked to the skin like a drowned rat. It was a noble woman, no doubt about it. "You can't be serious," Bly exclaimed, eyes bulging. But half of that was an act. There really could be no doubt about it. Charlotte had seen the woman too. She was wearing this pure white dress with a necklace of golden jewels hanging around her neck and down to her chest. And they were all the real thing too. I didn't see any fangs, but those trinkets really seemed to suit her. "That's the real proof of being nobility. Where is she?" While I watched, she laid you down right here, and then, poof, she vanished like smoke. Bly didn't know what to say. "No, just kidding. A huge bat came down from the sky, and she rode off on its back." "That's a lie." If it came to a question of which was less believable, it would definitely be the latter. Charlotte threw her head back without another word and laughed. "Yeah, it's a lie. Lies, lies, lies. The whole world is made up of 100% bullshit." All Bly could think was, this is one strange woman. What was the true nature of the beauty who'd saved him? Some manifestation of the will that didn't want them to leave the village. His interest was focused on that alone. "Can you walk?" Charlotte asked. "I think I can manage." "Then go on and get walking, whatever direction suits you. I'm going to the village. Everyone else is already gone." As the woman stood up again, Bly finally remembered something he could do. "Thank you," he said. An odd expression flitted across the woman's face, and she asked, "What's that?" "What? Just thank you." "Ah, an expression of gratitude? It's been so long since I heard it. I'd forgotten what it sounded like," the woman said, starting to walk away. Whatever you're aiming to do, you'd better be quick about it, she told him, or you and me both are looking at pneumonia. And with rapid steps the woman vanished. The rain continued to batter Bly. Ah, hell. With that single complaint he got to his feet, and then he, too, started toward the village at a jog. They'd all assembled in a large building that seemed to be some sort of local meeting house. The stone ceiling, walls, and floor were impervious to the rain. Surprisingly enough, there were rows of wooden chairs set up in the main hall, and an electric heater made of steel was glowing red. A pair of synthetic fiber mats had been laid out on the floor beside it, with Emily lying on one and Arbuckle's charge, Beth, on the other. And both were in their underthings, but that was unavoidable. Their dripping wet clothes were still where they'd been, thrown on the floor. Josette or someone had probably put the girls in a dry change of underwear. And there was no sign of Brennan or Jan, or Josette, for that matter. They'd no doubt gone off to search for necessary supplies. "How's the warrior's wife doing?" Bly asked Arbuckle. Looking toward the windows, the procurer replied, "It was an incredibly superficial wound. After a little rest, she was fine again, and I went out with her husband to look for food and weapons. I thought as much. How about those other two? For the time being, an antifibrillary is keeping the fever in check, and just getting them out of the rain was a great help. And you had that fever medicine on you. I am a doctor, after all." "Spare me, flesh peddler," Bly spat back. As he was saying that, Charlotte walked past him and over to the plump man. "I'll give you a hand once I get changed," she told him. "Most kind of you. This girl is one matter, but if I let the other one die, it may cost me my life." "You're a doctor, so how'd you wind up running girls, eh?" "The workings of the world." Yeah. Traveling bag in hand, Charlotte opened the door to the adjoining room and, after checking that it was safe, stepped inside and closed the door again. "By the look of it, this was built 3,000 years ago," Bly said, surveying the room. "They just stacked stone on stone and threw an electric heater. That's it. But I'm surprised anything this old is still around." "Indeed, and without a speck of rust. Plus the village has working electricity." Arbuckle's words sent a chill through Bly. "This village, it's alive," he thought. "Only there aren't any villagers around. No. I'd say there's someone here," Arbuckle stated with a grin. It was one that could have been taken as either ironic or nihilistic. New villagers, that is. Us, Bly realized, and then he recalled what Arbuckle had said earlier. "Hey, is this the noble lab you were talking about?" "Yeah, most likely." Emily turned a shocked look their way. "An entire village from 3 millennia ago is turned up in pristine condition. Can you think of any other reason for that?" "Why'd it come back?" Arbuckle remained silent. "Don't worry on my account," Emily said in an emotionless tone. "We're their new lab rats, aren't we?" Bly continued. "No, I wouldn't exactly." "Can you think of anything else?" Arbuckle put his hand against Emily's forehead. "No, that's just two." The pretty young lady groaned, turning her face away. "Her fever's come down a lot, but we can't let our guard down just yet. I wrote them a note with the drugs we'll need, but do you suppose there's a doctor's house around?" "Not to worry," Bly replied. "The nobility will fix her right up. Hell, they'll even throw a little immortality into the bargain. Might not be so bad after all." "Stop it," Emily cried, and though the doctor held her shoulders down, she shook her head forcefully. "You said something about being lab rats. What kind of experiments would they use us for?" "That I don't know. Only that they were top secret. But this was a facility built on direct orders from the legendary sacred ancestor. It wouldn't be an ordinary blood manufacturing plant." With Arbuckle's words, a certain figure crept back into Bly's mind. Is that noblewoman in charge of the place or something? It was strange that he didn't actually speak these thoughts out loud, and he didn't know why. Bly went over to the westward-facing windows and peered out through spotless glass. And beyond the rain and the swaying forest, He could see the fortifications. The only way out of here is to go up there and talk to him. Is that it? The man thought. It felt as though all the blood were draining from his body. After he'd been looking out the window for a while, Charlotte returned, saying, "Sorry to keep you waiting." When Bly turned around, he was expecting her to be covered with mud, but suddenly she was wearing a clean change of clothes. She'd been sexy even after the rain had washed off all her makeup, but now that she'd reapplied her cosmetics, she was alluring to a numbing degree. She gave off a deep aroma, like a lily whiter and more conspicuous than the moon. "Why, whatever are you looking at?" she inquired in a tone that had confidence to spare. "Nothing," Bly replied, playing dumb. No good could come of encouraging a woman like that. Before long, the other three returned. At any rate, they had assembled all the essentials: dry clothes, blankets, flashlights, and electric lamps, canned goods, jerky, a plastic tank of drinking water, cups and paper plates, forks and spoons. "We found medicine, too," Josette said, handing Arbuckle a plastic bag containing several white packages. Pulling out a few of the boxes and taking some tablets from them, he filled some cups with water from the tank and made the girls both down them. "That puts Emily in the clear," said Arbuckle. "But the other one's not so simple. We've got to move her to a well-equipped hospital as soon as possible." "Where did you find these drugs?" "In the general store," Jan replied. "There wasn't a soul around, but it sure was well-stocked." Taking a look at the box the medicine was in, Arbuckle said, "It was manufactured almost 3,000 years ago." That sent a stir through the crowd. "That's in keeping with the style of the houses," he continued. "It would seem this village has been waiting our arrival for the last 3 millennia. "What do you mean by that?" Jan asked. When Arbuckle explained about the laboratory, the color quickly drained from the young man. "What kind of place have we wound up in? Why the hell is this village even here? What's it been all this time?" "Probably in that hill," Arbuckle said. What?" Jan exclaimed, and he wasn't the only one who bugged his eyes. And they all did. "I can't say for certain," the plump man continued, "but from what I saw during flashes of lightning, the top of the hill was about the same size as this village. When you think about the timing of its appearance and the way we felt like we'd fallen underground, but the next thing we knew we were back where we started, it kind of makes sense. We're still up on that hill." For a while, no one said anything. "Okay, let's get ourselves something to eat and think about our next move," Bly finally urged them. "There are some tables and chairs in the prep room next door," said Charlotte. All of them got changed, and while it wasn't quite a meal, they had something to eat. After that, the air of danger that had been hanging over them dissipated, and they settled down. "I don't think we can expect to be left alone like this for long," Brennan stated in typical warrior fashion. "Until we destroy whatever it is that keeps interfering with any attempts to flee. We can't get out of the village, and it'll be night soon." While all of them were put off by his deep voice and somewhat nasty tone, they could also sense the ugly truth that his words carried. When night came, the dead went into action. "I want no part of any of this. How can we just sit back and wait for the nobility to drink our blood? Doctor, would it be all right for me to leave and take Emily with me?" Roland asked, rapidly sinking into a maniac state. He was plain to see from his wardrobe that he hadn't been born on the frontier. His good fortune in not having to spend every day since childhood shoulder to shoulder with dread of the nobility had now become his terrible misfortune. If he could find some way to keep her completely out of the wind and rain, I suppose it would be okay. But it's just plain impossible. Something will get in your way. We only came out to the frontier on a sightseeing trip from the capital. We didn't want to come into direct contact with the nobility. Now that it looks that way, we'd like to get out of the village. The sooner the better. "Why don't you try telling that to whoever's running the place?" Arbuckle said. Seeming to have suddenly thought of something, he asked the Brennans, "Weren't there any weapons?" "Nope, nothing," Not so much as a knife, Yosette replied, shaking her head. What's the story with that? They wouldn't even be able to fix dinner, would they? Bly said in an incredulous tone. It probably means the nobility had to take good care of their lab rats. Give them all the food and water they want. Protect them from external threats. They'd have no need for weapons. In that case, I guess we've no choice but to cut some wood and sharpen it to a point, eh? Right you are, Doctor. Brennan concurred, though he seemed to append the title as a dig at the man. All you probably have at least a pocket knife on you. We brought back some wood for steaks. Now let's get whittling. In saying that, he took a paper bag he'd kept set down away from all the other supplies they'd laid out and dumped its contents on the floor. What spilled from it was a bunch of branches that had all been cut a little over 2 feet long. Chapter 1 End. The Expedition, Chapter 2, First Part. The very first to grab a stick was Bly. On seeing the way it had been cut, he groaned on the inside. I might not care for that bastard, but the whole warrior thing sure ain't for show. This thing looks like it was cut with a laser. Not wanting to scrutinize him too long or too hard, Bly had been looking away most of the time. But now that things had settled down and he got a good look at the man, he saw that Brennan had a rugged, angular face and build, with battered armor covering him from the chest down to the very tips of his fingers and toes. Both his garb and the crossed set of swords he wore on his back seemed to give off the stench of blood. The man had definitely been hardened in the fires of 100 battles. The wife, in contrast to her beast of a husband, was a beautiful woman with a slender face that gave an impression of tranquility. And there was also a terrible air of nihilism about her, as if she were a negative image of her husband. However, she wore the same kind of protective armor. Though she had no sword, the carrier she wore on her back had a weapon, and that put her husband's to shame. A belt-fed 20mm minigun, complete with a 5,000-round ammo box, and the woman was able to carry 150 pounds of guns and ammunition thanks to the scientific miracle of the carrier, which reduced her load to practically zero. It hardly let her pass for an ordinary woman. To either side of her waist, rails extended from the carrier, making it easy to shoot from the hip. Once the shooter got to their target on the display screen of the eyepiece, all they had to do was press the firing button and let fly with a stream of polymer steel rounds that could punch through 4 inches of metal plating. Of all the monsters the nobility had scattered across the earth, the great fire dragons were said to have the toughest armor, and nothing save that beast could withstand such a barrage. Of course, the price of such a weapon was astronomical, probably enough to purchase an entire small village out on the frontier, regardless of whether they'd gotten it by force or through negotiations. And the fact that they had made it clear this was no ordinary married couple. Bly pulled a survival tool called an S device from a case he wore on the back of his belt. A foot-long mass of metal, it could be used for cutting with a single thrust, blow, or pull, depending on how one held it. It also had a magnifying glass built into it, so starting fires wasn't a problem. There were blades of varying thicknesses, and by charge or changing the angle, one could either split a rock in two or peel an apple. Not surprisingly, the device caught Brennan's eyes, and the man said to Bly, "A handy little contraption you've got there." "Yeah, I bought it off an arms merchant. Lately, they let you do financing, which really helped." "Let me have a look at it." "Sorry, but no," Bly replied. He hadn't liked the way the warrior had said that, nor did he care for how quick the man was to put his hand out. "You and me haven't got along from the very start, you SOB." A deafening silence fell. The truth of Brennan's words was common knowledge. To be honest, all of them had known this could explode at any moment. More to the point, they were probably wishing it'd just explode already and get it all over with. However, it was Yosette who put a stop to things, saying, "Dear," from the way his wife was dressed and her character in general. It was a perfectly natural thing for her to do. But Brennan barked at her. "Keep your damn mouth shut. Would you please just stop this?" Arbuckle then interrupted. "Hey, you old flesh peddler." "That's me." the corpulent man said, raising his right hand. "Let's stop fighting amongst ourselves for the time being. Don't forget we're smack dab in the middle of a facility run by bloodthirsty nobles. If we intend to survive, we'll all need to cooperate. Even a single minor injury is more than we can afford." Truer words were never spoken. "He's right, dear," Josette said in a hard tone. Bly felt a horribly cold determination in it. If he'd had to put it into words, did she intend to shoot her husband? And the situation was resolved in the most appropriate fashion. "Okay," Brennan said, turning away sulkily. Before he did, however, he said, "But we're going to settle up sooner or later, fugitive." What gave me away?" Bly replied, though it was clear from his tone he was joking. Brennan's answer was deadly serious. "What kind of ordinary frontiersman would be walking around with a weapon like that? Takes a decade just to get the hang of it. Plus, you seem to be in more of a hurry than any of the rest of us. Because someone's on your tail. And finally, when you look at yourself, do you see an upstanding person?" "Well, if that don't beat all," Bly said, rubbing his face with both hands. "If that's the way it looks to you, guess there ain't much I can do. Sure, I've got the look of a wanted man. So yes, sir, whatever you say." Sitting down in front of a window, Bly began shaving the end of the branch to a point. Curls of wood fell as if he were merely skinning an apple, and in no time at all he'd fashioned some keen anti-noble weapons, drawing sounds of surprise from Arbuckle and Charlotte. In the time it'd take him to make 3 steaks, Arbuckle and Jan still hadn't finished the first. Bly took a long steak, actually closer to a short spear, and sharpened the opposite end to a point too. On seeing that he went on to put notches around the middle of it, Josette narrowed her gaze and asked, "What's that you're doing there?" "I figured there are times when just one stab won't do the trick, and then you can snap it off and you've got another one." "You sure you're really not a fugitive?" the warrior's wife said, making no attempt to conceal her surprise. "You seem more accustomed to battle than we are." And just then a mass of black slammed into her cheek, sending her backward. Stepping in front of his reeling Josette, Bly glared at her attacker and snarled, "What the hell was that for?" "Why don't you ask her?" Brennan replied, rubbing his fist as he turned around. "You son of a..." "Don't. It's fine. It was my mistake," the woman said. "Yeah, but..." "I shouldn't have said we. That's all." "That's all? What the hell?" Bly exclaimed, still ready to make a stand, but Arbuckle clamped down on his shoulder. "Stay out of my way. I'm gonna punch this jackass's lights out." "Do that, and you're likely to just bring down more wrath on his wife. It boils down to the question of pride. Surely you can see that, can't you?" Turning to face the woman, Bly asked, "You sure it's all right?" "Yeah," she answered, holding her cheek. A blow like that would be sure to leave a bruise. Bly felt he was getting a clear picture of the couple's relationship, but he shook his head to drive the images away. "Well, then it ain't for me to say otherwise. See you folks later." And raising one hand, the man headed for the front hall. "Where are you going?" an agitated Arbuckle inquired. "To the noble's mansion, of course, didn't you hear? They're having a dance party today. I got an engraved invitation and everything. I'll be the only human there. The invite said to come in casual attire and kindly bring a fresh wooden stake." "Hey, hold on a minute." "Sorry, I'm in a hurry. See, I'd like to be back here before sundown." "Heading up there alone is crazy," said Jan. "People come into this world alone, kid," Bly replied with a smile, "and they're alone again when they die. Funny how that works, eh?" "No, you're wrong," a woman's voice said, pulling the man back just as he was about to make a heroic exit. It was Charlotte. "How's that?" "When a baby's born, there's a doctor there to deliver it. Or even if there wasn't a doctor, your mother was there to give birth to you, right? And when you die, your wife will be there taking care of you." "Sorry, you're wrong there," ain't got a wife. You can be a real pain, you know that. At any rate, you need a woman with you, so I'll go. I've finished making a steak and everything. You'd just be in the way. That's right, said another female voice, the word striking Bly's shoulder. If an amateur goes, any trouble will just get chalked up to her being a woman. I'll accompany him. The voice was that of Yosef Brennan, first part end. Second part. You sure it's okay me borrowing his horse? Hubby's gonna blow his top. I don't care. For what it's worth, he did say no, Yosef remarked, smiling. Faintly. Beneath the plastic raincoat she procured at the general store, her black hair rolled in waves, and the rain continued to fall. As he kept his balance high in the saddle, Bly thought, your husband told you not to, but he didn't actually say it. Crossing the river, the two of them were about to enter the forest. From there, they would turn north and head for the fortifications. Maybe it's natural for midday, but ain't it creepy how quiet it is? Really, you seem used to it. What, to dead villages? To death in general? Spare me. If anyone was, it'd have to be the two of... Yes, I suppose so. But you never get used to it. At least I haven't. It doesn't look that way at all. Bly set his gaze falling on the weapon on Yosef's back, then bouncing off it again. The world of gloom only grew darker, for they'd entered the forest. Before they'd gone 100 yards, Bly wanted nothing more than to turn around and go back. What's the deal with this forest? Due to the rain, he knew they wouldn't hear any birds singing. However, there were no rabbits or other little critters to be seen scampering about, nor any indications that any were around, which was a bit much to believe. Creatures like squirrels lived in the trunks of trees. Bark-eating scales slept beneath the bark. Moles wriggled through the earth. Jump bugs sprang around in the grass. Winged insects sailed through the air. Water beetles skittered across puddles, and deer and the like beat small paths, all of which breathed life into a place that travelers could feel. And yet in this forest there was none of that. Though the rain-drenched plants and trees glistened sharp and fresh like a lovely painting, there was no pulse of life to be felt from this place. What do you expect? It's a forest on the nobility's lands. Yosef's words drew a sideward glance from Bly. Once, I passed through lands where an ancient noble still held sway. There were people there, but they had no spring to them, like they were all dead, and not a single bird song rang through the forests. Cripes, said the man. About 2 years later, I passed through the same lands, and it was like a whole different world. Everybody was so full of life, and the forest positively teemed with the sound of animals. Seems it got like that after a hunter came through a year earlier and slew the noble. Yeah, a noble. The thing is, I heard a lot about him, but since I ain't ever been around one, I just don't got a handle on them. You mean to tell me there are humans who can take down nobility? I thought the nobility kept their graves well guarded during the daytime, so getting to them was no easy task. There are exceptions, I suppose, Dampiers, for example. Ice water coursed down Bly's back, and he shuddered in spite of himself. In the forest it was 4 or 5 degrees cooler than outside, and rain was pouring down, but neither was responsible for his trembling. Dampier. The very word was cursed. Is it true they're all really ugly-looking, like the undead, and they can use witchcraft? Or that their arms and legs are all weird and twisted, and they've got another face on their backs? Damned if I know, I've never met one. What? But some of them are warriors too. Almost all Dampiers wind up as either vampire hunters or warriors. You ain't made acquaintances with any of them. We're not good at making friends. I can see that about your hubby, Bly said before looking up at the sky. Shit. When is this damned rain gonna let up? Got nothing better to do than slow folks down. I see. Seems you're in a hurry to hit the road, huh? Yosette said, a wry grin rising on her lips. No, I ain't in a hurry to hit the road exactly, but there's somewhere I definitely need to be. So badly you'd barge into a noble's mansion with no more than a steak. Well, it's that important to me. Besides, I've got more than just a steak, and it's still daytime after all. Suddenly, seeming to have recalled something, Yosette pulled back on her horse's reins. Oh, that's right. Did you know the nobility had intended to put out the sun? Bly bugged his eyes. Though he'd heard various anecdotes about the nobility, this was a new one on him. Put out the sun? Come on. Even for the nobility, that's going a bit far. Why do you suppose they didn't do it? A planet like this, where one's always always sure to be facing the sun, has really got to be about the worst place in the universe for the nobility to live. A permanent city was constructed for them on the dark side of the moon, and they say their exploration parties went as far as Alpha Centauri. After all, we're talking about folks who've got immortality and indestructibility working for them. They don't need any of the suspended animation chambers ancient humans dreamed up, and if a major accident were to happen, they could go outside and repair their ship without even wearing a spacesuit. And they'd be happy as a clam no matter how bad the radiation or cosmic rays might be out there. They could breathe a pure hydrogen sulfide atmosphere like it was fresh air, and a freezing cold planet would still seem like paradise to them. In all the vast universe, there couldn't have been many creatures like that, so efficient at survival they needed no food so long as they had dehydrated blood. Then shouldn't they have gone out into the universe more? Bly asked. From what I hear, anybody as sharp as the nobility could have made a ship that'd fly at the speed of light. They're damned if I know what light has to do with any of this. Meow. There are two theories about that. One is that it's some kind of psychological taboo for the nobility. The example I always hear is the fact that the city on the dark side of the moon was abandoned before a century had passed. In other words, the theory is that the nobility actually love light. And that had something to do with the beginning of the mysterious decline a few millennia ago. The second one involves them, the OSB, the outer space beings. Yeah. 5,000 years ago, a battle started between the nobility and the first alien race they encountered, and it went on for 2 millennia. The theory goes that the war was a crushing blow to the core of the nobility, and one they never fully recovered from. Just between the two of us, it seems the sacred ancestors' personal interest picked up speed during that era. What kind of interest are we talking about? I don't really know, but I've heard it involved dissecting humans and OSB. Dissection. The guy's some kind of freak. Suddenly, the ground shook. The cyborg horses were about to go wild, prompting the two riders to madly pull on the reins and stroke the beasts. See, what did I tell you? Speak ill of the sacred ancestor on the nobility's lands, and dead humans and nobles alike will come out of their graves to tear you to shreds. Whatever you say, ma'am. That was the last thing said, and the pair of them rode through the forest in silence. Reaching the foot of the hill in less than 20 minutes, the road twisted up a gentle slope all the way to the noble's castle. The noble's castle isn't old at all. No chance it's empty, eh? Josette said, and when she moved her right hand, the minigun on her back slid down the rail on the right-hand side. Thanks to a remote control firing mechanism and the flexible arm mounting, the weapon could target anywhere. Josette's body was trembling faintly. She knew all too well they weren't going to be exploring a vacant house. It was an easy enough climb up the stone-paved road, raising a hand to shield themselves from the rain. Each of them looked up at the towering stone walls. The first thing that struck them about the fortifications was how rough the outer walls seemed. The so-called nostalgic taste of the nobility varied in different eras, but for the most part they could be grouped under the heading elegant. Many of their mansions were done in the Baroque style of ancient times, and characteristically on the frontier, They were more properly called castles or fortresses. An interesting point was that even at their height, the nobility built castles for battling those under their banner who resisted and collected weapons for wholesale slaughter, and these proved a great contribution to the later OSB War, considered a shining beacon of foresight in the history of the nobility. During 2 millennia of fighting against the OSB, one of the most splendid results in check the alien invasion were the fortresses and castles of the frontier, as well as the factories there that produced weapons and facilities that ensured a constant power supply. After the lengthy war, the lords of the frontier took great pride in their ravaged castles, rebuilding them with even rougher, stronger walls. Also, rather than modernize the frontier, they seemed determined to send it even further into the past, releasing even more vicious primitive monsters that would later be taken as a symbol of their own period of ebb that followed. It was at this time that the fortresses that even now kept the frontier a domain of fear were constructed, but history only considered those who moved forward as its legitimate children. In no time the noble civilization had been swallowed up by the waves of their species' decline, and at present they showed no signs of bobbing to the surface again. However, the fortifications that the two humans now looked up at still retained the coarse image of frontier nobility, looming over the human race, not wavering in the least. And there was a gate set in the ramparts. The rivet-studded black iron doors were the first problem the pair would need to deal with. At any rate, all they could do was try giving them a push. Bly dismounted and reached out his hand for the gleaming black metal. The instant his fingers made contact, the door swung back from the center opening. "Hey, there's somebody here," Bly exclaimed after getting back in the saddle, and Josette nodded at his words. However, they passed through the gate and went into the front yard without seeing a single person. "They're treating us like idiots. I ain't about to let a castle screw with me," the man growled. "So in a castle like this, where would they put the graves?" the man asked, apparently having quickly reclaimed his reason. "One of 3 spots, a graveyard on the grounds and a chapel or underground. Ain't got much time. Which has the highest chances? The chapel, I suppose? By chapel you mean some kind of holy place for praying to the divinity?" "That's right. Why the hell would a nest of vampires have something like that? It must suit their tastes." "Damned if I understand," Bly said, tilting his head to one side and driving away a question he'd had for many years. The interior was rough and entirely rustic in feel, devoid of both the influence of Gothic elegance and the style researchers had termed ultramodern. Apparently Josette was accustomed to this, and aside from 1 or 2 mistakes, she guided Bly to the door they sought. But there in the vast place for supplications to the deity, which was like an enormous hall, they couldn't find a single coffin. After checking the floors and walls, anywhere a coffin might be stashed, Josette said, "In that case it must be underground. If they were buried out in the cemetery, they'd be spotted right away. It would have to be the worst place of all." "Well, there ain't much we can do about that. We can't really turn tail because we're spooked after coming all this way. That's the spirit." The pair's eyes were riveted to an iron door at the far end of the chapel. "Well, look at that," Bly said, adjusting his grip on a long stake. The iron door was open, but when they'd entered the chamber, he was certain it had been closed. After the pair had set out, the 2 girls' condition had become marginally stable. Setting the minds of their caretakers, Jan and Arbuckle, at ease, the other one there, Brennan, didn't help at all, but rather stared at the window into the rain. "If you're so concerned, why don't you go after them?" Arbuckle said to him. Turning, Brennan said, "My wife's got a bit of a warrior in her, too. She calls her own shots." "You said at the outset she was just an ordinary woman. Was that because it was to your advantage to have everyone believe so? Looking at the 2 of you, you don't seem all that independent." "What's that supposed to mean?" "What indeed?" Arbuckle replied cryptically, turning away in a snit. A shadow fell across his face. "What's that supposed to mean?" the warrior repeated, standing now by the plump man's side. "Hey, knock it off." An agitated Charlotte called over from where she'd been watching this develop. "This is hardly the time for squabbling, is it? If we don't work together, we're not going to make it out of here alive." "I can make it out of here on my own." Brennan said, his eyes giving off a weird gleam. If trouble starts, you folks are the ones that have had it. You're right, so just stop this. Don't go wasting your abilities like this, and you need to keep the peace, too. Jan, who was watching over his beloved, snapped to attention, saying, "She's right. Please just stop it. I saw something in a guidebook back in the capital. These parts were once a battlefield where the OSB fought the nobility. It might just be that both sides lured us to the village." "Huh," the physician Arbuckle exclaimed, his expression changing. He was facing one of the windows. "What's that out there?" Beneath the leaden sky, they all saw a black streak descending at an angle. It was neither bird nor flying monstrosity. It was a manufactured flying machine. "It can't be," Charlotte groaned. She recalled what Jan had just said. The OSB, outer space beings. Minds blanked. They all saw the glittering silver craft at the fore of that black smoke. It went down behind the castle. A few seconds later, a fireball erupted from the very place Jan had said. Second part end. Third part. Although they didn't see the flames from the chapel, the roar and the quaking of the ground reached the pair. "What the hell was that?" said Bly. It was pretty close to here. The two of them sped into action. Behind them, the door leading underground slowly closed. There was a certain sadness to it. Not confident that they couldn't navigate through the castle interior and at the back, the pair went back to the main entrance and got on their cyborg horses. Circling around the castle's outer walls, they reached the back. The first thing they saw hit them like a knife in the eye. "Sheesh," Bly groaned, while Yazette was left speechless. Less than 1,000 yards away, where the aircraft had apparently crashed, there were flames. However, the vast plain spreading before them was covered as far as the eye could see with the wreckage of countless machines. There were what had apparently been aircraft over 1.25 miles in length, engines for tanks that were 50 yards in length, width, and height, and the lower half of a Titanic warrior that looked like it would have stood 60 feet high, the heads of stone men weighing 5,000 tons each, as well as the primitive spears they used and dimensional blades. All of these things were half destroyed, melted, beaten by wind and rain for millennia, littering the plain and surrounding wilderness, but scattered among them were objects and shapes and colors clearly at odds with earthly physics. And this was a battlefield for the OSB and the nobility, Bly murmured in the tone of one who'd lost his soul. "So it appears. The aircraft went down there," Yazette said, but her eyes were vacant too. Feeling as if they'd wandered into a land of giants, the pair galloped through the rain. A shattered man of stone had his face turned toward them. The path ahead was blocked by the arms and legs of mechanized giants, and the wind whistled across the land of the dead. And then there was the rain. If not for the raging flames, the pair might have turned back along the way. From their first glance at the wreck, they knew there was no hope of rescuing anyone, unless they bailed out on the way down here. And there was no way anyone could have survived the scorching flames and blistering hell that even now buffeted the faces of the pair. It was so bad that Bly had to wonder if the scalding heat wouldn't bring the dead who'd lain here for millennia back to life. Out of the frontier, such things often went beyond the point of mere speculation. "I think we ought to go," Bly asked. "Yeah," Josette replied. She was just about to wheel her steed around when she suddenly jerked back on the reins. Pointing into the flames, she exclaimed, "What's that?" Bly was already facing the other way, and when he turned back, the two of them witnessed a black figure slowly walking toward them through the swirling palette of blistering heat. "No way. No, he's alive." Those were the only words they exchanged before the figure stepped from the flames. Actually, fire still enveloped him from head to toe, advancing to within 5 yards of the speechless pair of spectators. The anthropomorphic fireball extended his left hand by his side. Suddenly, the flames coursed across his body like a stream, being sucked into the palm of his hand while the pair stared in disbelief. Once the last tongue of flame had been swallowed, a man in black garb was laid bare to the pounding rain. In a wide-brimmed traveler's hat and the coat the hue of the night, yet an elegantly curved longsword across his back. And though it was incredible that none of his trappings showed any trace of the flames, what left both of them speechless and frozen in place was the man's beauty. Here was the radiance of youth so many geniuses had tried to capture in paint, song, and prose, but none of them had been able to express it. Because the light of his beauty didn't belong to the human race. It was the glow of angels and saints. Without even realizing it, Yosette had her hand pressed to her heart. She thought she could probably say something, but the beauty of his face was such that she couldn't get out a word, and the man started to walk right past Bly. "Hey, wait," the flustered Bly cried out to him. "How do you make it out of them flames? Were there any survivors? If so, we'd better go save them." "It's no use," the figure in black said over his shoulder. The rain spattered off him. "Yeah, you've got a point," Bly thought knowingly. But that being the case, he had a million things to ask the man. Swiftly wheeling his steed around, Bly caught up with the man. "You're lucky you survived, but you're still in a world of hurt. This is a noble testing ground. You splashed down an old noble OSB battlefield. Did you know that?" Before the man could answer, Yosette said in a conclusive tone, You're a hunter, aren't you? And I don't mean the garden variety of vampire hunter." There was no reply. Bly's eyes were bugged out. Yosette continued, "If so, you must have been sent from heaven above. The will of the nobility lives on here. Or maybe the nobles themselves are still hale and hearty." And the young man in black halted. It wasn't that he'd taken an interest in the pair's words. He'd merely reached the crest of the path. To the left, the rear wall of the castle loomed. He was taking in the panorama of the rain-shrouded village below. Something starting here, Bly thought, certain of himself. His body trembled, and not due to the chill of the rain. Something intense is going to happen. A lot worse than anything we could have done. On account of this guy. Bly realized it was already too late. From the instant the gorgeous young man had appeared, everything had started to flow in another direction. While he knew that wouldn't necessarily be the way they wanted things to go, the realization that there was nothing he could do was pounded into Bly the same way the rain hammered the ground. "Bly's the name. I'm a drifter. I'm Yosette Brennan, a warrior's wife." "D," he replied with surprising speed. Sensing something racing through every inch of Yosette's body, Bly looked over his shoulder. Surprise was just spreading across her slim, lovely countenance. He was immediately consumed by admiration, which was in turn devoured by yet another emotion, fear. "D," the warrior's wife parroted, a blank look on her face. She took off her vinyl covering. "Here, put this on." The young man who'd introduced himself as D turned his face away a bit from the raincoat she proffered, saying, "No thanks, but I appreciate the offer." Though Yosette dazedly pulled the vinyl garment back, she made no attempt to put it back on. "Hey, you don't mean to tell me," Bly began to say in a perplexed tone. Was she doing that as a sign of respect? D started walking. He headed down the sloping path without even glancing at the fortifications, and the other two followed after him. They didn't feel much like going back to the castle. After all the strength that had been entirely drained from them, they were like children playing with plastic swords when a swordsman with a real blade had suddenly shown up. And the difference seemed that staggering. When they were halfway down the slope, a dull sound reverberated from the backyard. A door had closed. A short time later, there was another. What the hell was that? We left the door open when we came out here. And Bly mused, twisting his upper body around for a look at the castle. "No, they're calling to us," Yosette replied. "Or perhaps cursing us for getting away." "You mean they were waiting for us?" "Yeah, probably," she answered, and then she gave a hard, decidedly unladylike look at D's back. "What do you think?" She got an immediate reply. "Better think about what comes next. This village is full of danger." The two of them were rendered speechless. They remained so all the way back to the meeting house. Just as they were about to dismount from their cyborg steeds, Bly and Yosette involuntarily cried out in disappointment. Dee hadn't halted, but rather was continuing on straight toward the main entrance to the village. "Hey, just a second there. You mean to tell me you're leaving?" "It's no use," said the woman. "You can't get out." And though he seemed to be walking at a leisurely pace, Dee was putting distance between them like a speed walker, and they couldn't let that stand. And the two of them knew perfectly well that their fates depended on the beautiful young man. "I'm gonna go after him and try talking some sense into him," said Bly. "You should head back." "Okay, see if you can do something." "Just leave it to me," he replied with a thump of his chest, but they both knew it was a show of false bravado. Bly galloped along on his horse until he was alongside Dee. Immediately dismounting, he took a place by Dee's left. "Okay, just hear me out," he began, giving the young man a brief recap of the situation up until now and informing him of their own failed attempts to escape. The only interest he showed was in the part where a woman had saved Bly from a muddy snare. What sort of woman? Well, you see, she had on this pure white dress, with black hair all the way down to her waist, and in the end she rode off on a huge damn bat. I shit you not. At that point, a hoarse, raspy voice that hardly seemed like it could belong to Dee said from somewhere, "Duchess, hi, darling." "What?" Bly said, looking all about in spite of himself, but there was no one else around. In that case, was that Dee just now? And him with a face like that? Is this what they mean when they talk about nobles going back to their true age an instant before they die? And the question was just what the flop from his mouth, like too much bread and ham he'd bitten off. But of course Bly wasn't stupid enough to actually ask it. "Could be," Dee replied, as the man had thought there was a definite second presence here. But where was he, or it? "So, just who's this Helderling?" the man inquired, and then gunshots echoed behind him. It wasn't the conventional crack of a rifle. Rather, it was the sound of a burst of fire from a high-caliber minigun. It died down, and then another burst. Second part. Chapter 2, End. Shadows lurking in the village. Chapter 3, First part. As soon as she set foot in the meeting house, Josette noticed something was wrong. No one was there. The heater was still blazing, blankets were spread out where Beth and Emily had lain, and damp clothes hung over chairs by the heater. Everyone's bags sat in the first place she looked, meaning they hadn't been touched. The room was warmer than it had been when they left. If they'd all gone somewhere, or made good their escape, it had to have been a good while ago. Or had they simply disappeared? The phrase "spirited away" flashed through her brain. Where could they have gone? Leaving all their baggage behind and not even bothering to turn off the heater. Josette shifted the high-caliber minigun down by her hip. While flicking off the safety, she simultaneously activated the box of ammunition on her back, creating some slack in the ammo belt so she could fire without it jamming. The strangeness of this occurrence drove deeper into Josette's heart with each passing moment. If the group had encountered some hostile force, her husband wouldn't have gone without leaving some signs of a fight. Were they really spirited away after all? Bolstered by her impatience, Josette's ears caught a faint thump. Turning on reflex, she ended up facing the door that led to the adjoining room. It was closed. She heard something again. Footsteps. She listened intently. They were approaching the door. They stopped just shy of it and didn't move. "Who's there?" Josette asked in a low voice. There was no reply. "It's me," said the woman. "I'm back now. Nothing's wrong, so come on out." Shifting the barrel of her weapon from the door to the wall about a yard away, Josette hit the firing button. Even the touch of a baby's finger would have been enough to trigger it. And the minigun shook. The flexible arm absorbed the vibrations. Even at the full auto setting of 2,000 rounds per minute, she could keep a bead on a foe 1,000 yards away. although the enemy would be shredded. The 10-foot round burst opened a 10-foot wide hole in the wall. The white figure could be glimpsed bolting to the right. "I saw that." The words were accompanied by another barrage, but it already occurred to the woman that she shouldn't kill whoever this was. Relenting after a second 10-round burst, she returned the minigun to her back and drew the pistol from her hip. She was facing the back of the meeting house. Nobody was there. No one at all. "Whoever you are, come on out." Although Josette didn't notice it at the time, on the floor about 6 feet to her right, a pale man's head appeared stealthily, and it slowly began knifing across the stone floor as if it were water, bound for her ankle. Opening and closing in an unsettling manner, the hand's fingers were just about to touch her boot, but grabbed empty air instead. There was a man's cry from the hall, and Josette began walking in that direction, saved by the veritable hair's breadth. The hand curled its fingers in regret, and then once more sank through the stone floor. "What's going on?" asked the pale-faced Bly. "See for yourself," Josette replied, going on to tell him of everyone's disappearance. On hearing that the target of her fire had been a white figure, Bly looked as if he'd been run through the heart. "What is it?" Nothing," the man replied. There was no point in telling her about it now. "We were brought here because they needed people, weren't we?" "Could be," the man conceded. "So what happened to Dee?" Seeing the way Josette's face fogged over with rapture, Bly wasn't disgusted, but rather acknowledged that it was only natural. "I ain't never seen anybody so pig-headed before. Even after hearing the gunfire, he just kept right on going." Josette heaved a sigh. Bly sensed this was due not so much to the disappointment in not joining them as to his failure to say goodbye. "We ain't safe here either. I think we ought to relocate to a house somewhere." "Would we be safe there?" "Nope," Bly said with a grave shake of his head. "Still, it'd be better than here. Let's get going. Luckily, our bags are still here." "Yeah, you're right," Josette replied with a nod, acquiescing to startling ease. But such was to be expected from a warrior's wife. Gathering up everyone's baggage, the two of them went outside. Josette, who stood at the fore, drew a deep breath. The black figure was approaching through the blurry curtain of rain. "I'll be damned," said the woman, her voice carrying tension and fear, and expectation. That expectation was met. About 6 feet shy of the pair, the figure took shape as Dee. "You folks moving house." Josette was about to lose her mind. Dee's voice had been so hoarse he sounded like a 100-year-old codger. On seeing how she was looking all around, Bly felt a small sense of satisfaction. "Everyone's vanished on us, only their bags were left. I saw something white and opened fire on it, but it ran off before I could find out what it was, so we figured we'd hold up somewhere else. Got someplace in mind." Now it was relief that nearly drove Josette out of her mind, for Dee had spoken in his normal voice. "No, but I was thinking maybe we'd pop into a nearby farmhouse or something." Saying nothing, Dee turned. Following his lead and noticing what it was he faced, Josette and Bly gasped and swallowed hard. Due to the increased impetus of the rain, they could make out no more than a hazy shape, but it was the fortress. "Oh, come on. That's a noble lair," Bly said, and he spoke for Josette too. "If you're talking about their lair, the same could be said of the entire village," Dee said before eyeing the two of them in silence. Josette shut her eyes. She felt so sad she could die. "Hey," Bly exclaimed, elbowing her and giving her a look of contempt. "You're a real sucker for pretty boys, ain't you, lady? I've been giving you too much credit." "Watch how you talk about me," she shot back, jabbing him twice with as much force. "And I'll thank you not to keep calling me lady. The name's Josette, mister." Gotcha, Bly replied with a hearty nod. This was no time for squabbling. Anyway, Dee's right, so I don't know if I could just go up to a noble's castle and...
To get out of this village, you gotta learn the noble's secret. Isn't that why you two went up there?
Feeling like she was about to lose her mind again, Josette rubbed her temple. It was that damned hoarse voice again. It would save a lot of trouble. That came from Dee. Josette felt as if she were listening to some nightmarish comedy skit. Okay, let's do that. That fine by you? At Bly's question, Josette nodded. Just then Dee turned and looked back. Bly strained his eyes. There were 4 of them. A quartet of shadowy figures fanned out behind them. Each was tall. They wore sopping wet clothes, humans or humanoid at the very least. However, there was something odd about them, something that couldn't quite be nailed down. You folks from the village, Bly said, trying to establish a friendly rapport. We were staying at a nearby inn. Came here to escape a massive landslide. Where is everybody? The 4 of them advanced suddenly. The sun was still high, yet they seemed locked in darkness. The second figure from the left extended his right hand. It was at that instant the others realized what was odd. Dozens of bluish-black tentacles burst from the cuff of the figure's shirt, sticking to Bly's face. Latching onto them with his hands to try and pry them off, Bly was dragged forward, and into the rain, into the world of the shadowy figures. A glint of light pulled the man back. At that moment, Josette looked at Dee. The blade he gripped in his right hand was wet. And that was all she knew. A heartbeat later, the tentacles were severed with an explosion of blood, the same bluish-black hue, and Bly first stopped in his tracks, then back toward his companions. Tentacles rained to the ground from his face. OSB, Dee asked.
An OSB human composite,
The hoarse voice responded.
Damn sacred ancestor. It's downright scary how he never tired of this shit.
In the meantime, the shadowy figures had readied for their next attack. All had drawn pistol-like weapons from their belts and had them trained on Dee. From the way they moved, they definitely pulled the triggers. However, there was no muzzle flash. But Dee kicked off the ground without a sound, his sword flashing out, and forehead sailing up like ripe fruit, bathed in a fountain of their own blood as they rolled across the terrain. Looking down at the one that stopped by his feet, Bly cried out and jumped back. He'd been sure it was a human head, but it swiftly decayed, melting away into a slime of a hue that was not of this world, that was then washed away in the rain. Neither Bly nor Josette could speak at first. More than the fear of a new attack by their enemies, it was Dee's swordmanship that had left them dumbstruck. He had beheaded a quartet in the blink of an eye, and while there was a chance the rain had washed it away, there hadn't been so much as a drop of gore on his blade. Here was someone from a completely different world than theirs. Bly said, trying to speak to the hunter. But Dee had already started walking toward the fortress. The very picture of solitude, it became a shadowy outline, and slid off to one side. No one could have imagined it. The beautiful fiend who dispatched 4 foes in an instant had feebly toppled at length. What the hell happened? When the 2 of them dashed over, a hoarse voice explained,
Nothing. Just got sleepy all of a sudden.
Before it had been nothing save unsettling, but now it seemed like a voice from heaven on high.
Lately we've been working out in the strong light, it continued. And them flames earlier took a toll too. The castle's not gonna happen now. Get us into that farmhouse.
Not entirely sure of what was going on, the pair still knew in an instant that those instructions were for the best. With Bly putting Dee over his shoulder and Josette taking the 2 cyborg horses by the reins, they started walking toward the farmhouse that loomed to their right. No one was witness to this save the other 3 heads that still lay in the downpour, giving off white smoke. By the time Bly, Dee, and Josette had passed through the farmhouse door, these too had decayed. Featureless, eyes melted, ears fallen off. All that remained in the street now of the humanoid quartet were 4 sets of clothing, leaking the virulent colored sludge that had once been their bodies, which the pounding rain quickly dissolved as well. First part end. Second part. Dee's violent decline was the result of sunlight syndrome, a condition exhibited solely by human noble half-breeds, Dampiers. It could render them unconscious without warning, and no amount of trying could rouse them. Having no recourse but to wait for him to awaken on his own was a horrifying proposition, and that might take a few seconds, or a few years, and in some cases even a few centuries. It was impossible for any physician to say how long it would take, or for the Dampiers themselves for that matter. On hearing this from Josette, Bly grew pale. Without Dee, they were afraid to go up to the castle. At some point, they'd become psychologically dependent on the hunter. Could just the two of them leave Dee there and go on to the castle? Not a chance. Since we don't know when he'll wake up, we can't stay here forever, Bly insisted, smacking his fist into the palm of his other hand. Excuse me, whoever that other voice is, but where exactly are you? Josette inquired amiably.
Let's just keep that a secret. See, we're surrounded by enemies.
Well, your voice will be enough. Give us some good advice. All our people have vanished, and you can see what's become of our great hope. Plus the enemies come at us in daylight. So what do we do?
You're gonna do as I tell you?
The hoarse voice said in a strangely confident tone.
If so, I might have a few pearls of wisdom to drop on you.
Don't go acting so important, you SOB. Bly snarled, rolling up his sleeves. Start talking. If you don't, I'll find you for sure and tear you to pieces.
I'll give it a shot, you counterfeit thug. One look at me and you'll feel a lot better.
See if I don't. Bly shouted, reaching for the survival tool known as an S device, but Josette stopped him. Knock it off right now. Staying alive is our first priority. We'll do as you say. What should we do?
I'll leave it to the lovely lady to see the light. First off, lock this place down. Seal up every last door and window. You should find the stuff to do it in the general store.
You must have had yourself a good look around. Bly spat, but the warrior's wife got to her feet. The general store, eh? Let's get going. Their destination had been less than 100 yards away, and the shop was as quiet as every place else, and there they found rows of merchandise waiting for them. Hammers and nails were easy enough to locate. As Bly looked around for anything else they might need, Josette said to him, You know, those things earlier weren't really human or nobility. I think they were OSB, like Dee said. Yeah, probably. They were crazy strong, and humans or nobility don't look as creepy as all that. They were human in shape, though. Maybe that's the sort of experiments they run in this here village. What do you suppose the sacred ancestor wanted to do? I'll be sure to ask him if I ever run into him. Bly replied, Oh, now this is a find. Scent of Norak from the Norak Soap Company. They went out of business more than 500 years ago. But the stuff's legendary for how good it was at getting out dirt in the way it smelled after. Who'd have thought we'd find some here? That's a keeper. Ebullient, the man grabbed one bar, then 2 more, and then still more until his hands were so full he dropped one. Oops. As he squatted down to retrieve the soap, Bly noticed something. There were the sandal-clad feet of a woman beside him. Straightening up in amazement, he was greeted by Charlotte's pale visage. It was only natural that he let out a cry of surprise and stood bolt upright. He even blinked his eyes. Still, Charlotte didn't fade from view. Dear me, why so surprised? Charlotte said with a smile. His eyes must have been playing tricks on him just now because her color was normal. Bly looked over at Josette. She wasn't there. He quickly understood why every hair on his body had risen on end. The door to the back room was hanging wide open. She'd gone off in search of something. There's nothing wrong with me, is there? Charlotte said with a flirtatious laugh. I guess not. Bly had to confess. He then asked, what about everybody else? And that was the real question. They're fine. They'll be back soon. Back from where? Somewhere far, far away. A smile rose on Charlotte's lips. Bly thought to himself sadly. Say, would you bring me back where you're staying? I'd like to leave the village with you. Nope, Bly replied, shaking his head. Why not? Charlotte asked, taking a step closer and draping a pale arm around his neck. Why won't you look at me? 'Cause your eyes are awful red. Come on, give me a kiss. No thanks. Why not? 'Cause your eye teeth are longer and sharper than before. How do you say you noticed? Charlotte laughed. She hid her teeth no longer. You should be like me. It feels so good. Power surged into her arm. Pushing back against it with his left hand, Bly said, Sorry about this, and swung the S device he'd drawn with his right at her decisively. It struck Charlotte at the base of the neck and sliced her diagonally clear down to the vertebrae. As Bly pulled the weapon out again, Charlotte stood there, her lips twisting into a grin. That didn't hurt one bit. And the others? Is everybody like you now? Nope, she replied languidly, her head swinging from side to side with a seductive look. They're different. I'm the only one who ended up like this. Now give me a kiss. Back, Bly exclaimed, brandishing his weapon again, but Charlotte's hand touched his. Though she only appeared to brush him, Bly felt frozen down to the bone and couldn't move. Now then, Charlotte said, her smile nothing if not bright and cheery. She pressed her lips to the nape of his neck. Bly quaked with despair at his fate. Without warning, the lips came away from him. As the woman pulled back, her face was quickly chiseled with a look of pain and anger. Charlotte planted both hands on his chest and shoved him back, then turned around. The tip of the short spear that took her through the back and burst from the top of her breast was wet with fresh blood. Ah, that's right, she said. There was someone else with you. Right you are. As Charlotte turned, Josette pointed the minigun at the woman's chest and gave her a nod. There are a ton of things I'd like to ask you. If you'll surrender quietly, I won't do anything to you. Charlotte shrugged her shoulders, and there was a sadness to the gesture. Sorry, but it can't be that way. Bright blood spilled from her mouth. To keep it from getting on her face, Josette raised one hand to block it, and at that instant, Charlotte made a powerful kick off the floor. While in midair, her body was torn apart, scattered into countless chunks of bloody flesh, and a number of them left splotches of red on Josette's face. Second part, end. A third part. Leaving the scene of the tragedy as it was, the pair returned to the farmhouse. Perhaps sensing the aura of despair that radiated from every inch of them, the hoarse voice met them with the query, Oh, something happened, eh? Yeah, something, and it went like this. Once Bly related particulars, he got at his reply, I see. Seeing as the hoarse tone wasn't particularly surprised, Bly had to wonder. You seem pretty used to all this, don't you? Well, yeah. The hoarse voice laughed. It's an old story. Only the components have changed. What do you mean by that? Josette asked, and it came as little surprise that her tone had changed. There was the shock of their vanished compatriot returning as a servant of the nobility, plus the fact that Charlotte had appeared in the daytime. Mix a noble and a human and get a dampier, like our friend here, the voice said. By Bly's estimation, it was coming from the vicinity of the hunter's left hand. There are other dampiers too, but it's pretty much safe to say none of them have this guy's power. So it looks like the sacred ancestors trying to make a different version of him. Mixing human beings with nobility, Yozet cried out incredulously.
But given there isn't anyone who's fueled the rumor mill like this guy, I don't think his efforts have paid off. Maybe he keeps experimenting in vain even now.
But the sacred ancestor is long since.
Yeah, there are a number of rumors he was destroyed, but there's no proof any of them are true. And that's why he's a legend.
Wait a minute. If the sacred ancestor is still alive, how do you explain the nobility going to the slide for the last 3,000 years? Bly inquired.
That's why I'm not saying he's alive either.
The hoarse voice countered. It carried a faint laughter.
Dead or alive, whatever the case, what you see is probably no more than an illusion of the sacred ancestor. Hell, it might be the whole nobility civilization is one too.
You think an illusion's got us trapped in here, jackass? Bly snarled. You know, it seems Charlotte said the others hadn't become vampires yet. We've got to hurry up and save them.
Zzz.
Really? Are you pretending to be asleep? Yalzite exclaimed. Perfect bastard. Hell, you and D are both useless.
It's sunlight syndrome,
said the hoarse voice. You little bastard. Narrowing his search down to the vicinity of the hunter's left hip, Bly was about to pounce, but nothing lay there but D's left arm. The sun will be going down soon, Yalzite said as she watched the dull light fading through a window. Let's get down to boarding the place up. The farmhouse proved larger than expected, and securing every opening save a window in the living room took more than 4 hours. Furthermore, they moved what furniture they could, cupboards, dressers, and the like, to block off every door but the front one. And when their work was finally finished, the two of them plopped down on the floor, drenched in sweat and wheezing for breath. While they'd been working, there'd been a gusty little sound like someone using a fogger coming from Dee's room, but it ended before either of them even heard it. Hey, isn't Dee up yet? Bly called out over between breaths. Not yet. When will he wake up? Don't know. Zzz, you little bastard. At that point, Yosette raised her sweat-streaked face. What's wrong? The man asked. Quiet. Silence descended, but it was immediately shattered. On her jet, Yosette had a gold pendant shaped like a bell out on top of her armor. It was giving off a ring that was clear, if faint as smoke. Before fortifying the place, Bly had seen Yosette scattering something shiny around the house, coming back, and then scattering some more 3 times in total. Could it be they were bells like this? When something touched them, did they make a sound like someone resonated through the one around Yosette's neck as well? No sooner had this rationale occurred to the man than Yosette explained, I scattered the same sort of bells around. If someone touches them, the sound's transmitted to this one. Someone like who? I don't know. Just stay on your toes. Charlotte showed up out of nowhere, right? And since they can hear the bells too, they may stop trying to walk around quietly. Great. Bly growled, spear in hand as he looked all around.
Relax,
The hoarse voice called out to them.
While the two of you were nailing things down, I put up a shield up inside the house.
Such words would always be welcome, even in that voice. A shield? How'd you manage that? Bly inquired.
Zzz.
Screw you. At any rate, we don't have to worry about him suddenly popping in through the windows, right?
That's right.
That in itself will be a great big help, Yosette remarked, her tone one of complete faith in the source of the hoarse voice. In their present situation, she had to believe if she wanted to keep from losing her mind. Faint as it had been, now they'd lost the rays of sunlight that watched over the world and chased the darkness away. And a long night was beginning. It was the world of the nobility, a world of evil. How many are there? Bly asked, his words heavy and clinging. 1, Yozet replied, closing her eyes and listening intently. 5 yards out. 4, 3, 2, 1. Right outside the door now. A knock rang out. It wasn't a thoughtless hammering. Rather, it was the rapping of a considerate guest.
"They're here,"
the hoarse voice said. Turning her minigun toward the door, Yozet asked, "Who is it?" Though low, her tone burned with fighting spirit. But that determination soon pitched wildly. "It's me." Amazed, the woman cried out, "Dear." Bly heard it too. The voice was that of Lyle Brennan, Yozet's husband. He'd come back. A warrior tested in the fires of 100 battles. "Please, just hear me out," Brennan continued. "I managed to escape, but they're after me. Hurry up and let me in." Fighting back his own rashness, Bly looked at Yozet. Dark flames burned in her heart. The fire showed in her eyes, as murderous intent. "We can't do that, dear. Come back after dawn," Yozet said with determination. "Don't give me that bullshit. I've got people on my tail. They could kill me at any minute. You're my wife, aren't you?" "I don't know. I don't know about anything," Yozet replied, her words gnawed over by fangs of pain. Bly came to her aid, saying, "It's me, Bly. You hear me, Brennan?"
"Yeah."
"Hate to say it, but I got attacked by Charlotte. She was a full-on servant of inability. We can't trust you either. Answer a question for me. You think I've got time for this shit?" The door jolted violently. "If you don't open the door, I'll bust it in." "Stop it, dear. If you come in, I'll have to open fire on you." "Yozet, is that any way to talk to your husband? Forget shooting me and shoot that jerk." Bly shouted, "What happened to all of you? Where have you been all this time, and what have you been up to?" "They're coming," Brennan said, his voice quavering. "Open up, hurry." Yozet looked at Bly. "No can do. He could be lying," said the man. "I'm sorry." He never would have suspected the minigun she held by her hip would swing around to slam in the back of the head. Sparks shooting across his eyes, Bly blacked out. He quickly regained consciousness. Yozet was by the doorway. The door was half open. She was thrusting the barrel of the minigun at it, trying to dislodge the board she'd shot through. Bly got to his feet and was about to dash forward. "Stop!" His tongue failed him. His feet got tangled too. Pitching forward, he felt a pain from the back of his head, and then it went dark again. When he desperately tried to get up again, Brennan came through the door. "Over there," Yozet said, pointing to a spot, and then she began replacing the board she'd removed. Her right hand held a hammer. "So you the one kept me from getting in here." Brennan called over to Bly. Still laid out on the floor, the warrior stood there like a wrathful deity. Despite his headache, the man had no trouble reading the hatred in that voice. "This is going to be ugly," he thought. "Save your venting for later. We needed every hand we got." Even as Brennan listened to Yozet, he drew the sword from his back. "Dear, this hoodlum thought he could decide whether I lived or died, did he? I won't sit still for that." The warrior raised his blade. They heard the whistle of a split second before the steel was about to sink into Bly's chest. "What's that?" Swinging his head around with incredible speed, Brennan turned his gaze to the door to the adjacent room. The room where Dee lay. Like a man pursued by fear, he leapt into the next room, and there he saw Dee lying in bed. He only halted for a moment in the doorway due to the shock of the sleeping hunter's good looks. Going over to the bed, the warrior looked down at Dee, whom he'd never met before, and said, "So this is him. He's handsome, I'll give him that. Damn if I keep looking at him, I'll lose the will to kill. Now to get rid of him." Holding his sword up along the right side of his head as if it were a bat, he was just about to bring it down on Dee's neck when someone said,
"Doesn't seem like he's possessed after all."
It was a hoarse voice he absolutely wouldn't have thought was the hunter's. So Brennan bugged his eyes and started looking all around.
"Who's that? Where are you?"
He got an answer.
"Right here."
It was at that moment that Dee's left arm reached for Brennan. Swinging the sword was pure reflex for the warrior. The way the hand went flying from the wrist down left him feeling slightly puzzled. His aim had been a little higher than that. The limb flew through the air, struck the door, and fell to the floor.
"There's no blood,"
Brennan said, squinting his eyes to look at the wrist, but he quickly thought better of it and raised his sword once more. This time, he was interrupted before he could swing it. Brennan arched backward. A short handmade spear was stuck in his back.
"Knock it off, you SOB. You really did get yourself turned into one of the noble's lackeys, didn't you?"
Bly bellowed from the doorway. For all his shouting, Brennan hadn't been hurt badly.
"No, it's not like that. He made the first move on me."
The warrior reached back and pulled out the spear. A bloody flower swiftly blossomed on his back.
"Get back on your feet and take your medicine. You tried to kill Dee just now, didn't you?" "No, he attacked me." "Shut up and die already."
Bly raised a second short spear to strike, but at that moment his ears caught these words. "It's like the clown says."
"Huh?"
Poised as he was to hurl his weapon, Bly was knocked off balance and stumbled forward. "Dear," Yelzet said, rushing over, and on seeing her husband's condition, she gave Bly a horribly vengeful look. If Brennan hadn't told her just then to stop, she might have opened up with the minigun and reduced Bly to 1,000 bloody chunks.
"You're all making a big mistake. We've already got to the bottom of this misunderstanding. Focus what's on outside,"
the hoarse voice said. "I didn't see anything," said the woman.
"No, they're coming after me."
Yelzet was about to refute that when her ears caught a dull impact that sent vibrations through every inch of her. Chapter 3 End.